outside of that courthouse. Lisa, we always talk about how the political and the legal intertwine. Today, you saw them on a straight-on collision course.
You absolutely did. And Alicia, for anybody who's been watching Trump's investigations and legal cases, I feel like we sort of reached phase 3 here in terms of that convergence between legal and political. It used to be that they operated on parallel planes, that you might hear themes echoed in the legal sphere that Trump had first articulated in the political sphere. But now, in the E. Jean Carroll trial, the roles are somewhat reversed. We are now seeing Trump trot out on Truth Social and in his public statements themes that are first articulated in court. And sort of the feedback loop, it's not clear which goes first, the chicken or the egg, the law or the politics. But I'll give you an example. When his team was blocked from certain things in closing arguments, Trump had thrown up his hands. He walked out of the courtroom. He was so frustrated with how Judge Kaplan treated him when he wanted to testify. And he said, "This is not America. This is not America. This is not America." Well, look at the Truth Social post that he just posted, as Vaughn brought to our attention. What is the last line in all caps? "This is not America." It's like a full circle between the courtroom and the law. And Alicia, I want to make one other point that's really hitting home for me. You know, we see all sorts of funny memes on the internet about Special Counsel Jack Smith. Help me, Special Counsel Jack Smith, you're our only hope, as if he's a Obi-Wan Kenobi-like figure in a Star Wars-like universe. But in actuality, who is the first person to really get legal accountability from former President Trump? It's an 80-year-old woman who is a survivor of his sexual assault. That is the person that achieved accountability here. Not any elected district attorney in either New York or Georgia, not Special Counsel Smith, not the Department of Justice, E. Jean Carroll.
You know, I asked you earlier, Katie Phang, the conversations you thought would be happening between Donald Trump and his legal team. You see Alina Habba in front of the mics there. That response that Vaughn read us from the former president, it says that he is still the one who is steering the ship.
Yeah, and we know that, right? Because we've seen a parade of Trump lawyers that are basically legal megaphones or legal speaker phones for what Donald Trump is trying to convey through the legal filings that he does, et cetera. But and I've written extensively and spoken a lot about this, how I find it such a denigration of the legal system. If you're a lawyer and you're taking on a client like Donald Trump, it's all about that attorney-client relationship. And what are you doing as a lawyer to be able to serve the ultimate purpose for your client? And listen, again, we're not privy to those conversations, and maybe they're exceptional conversations in terms of tracking the rules of professional conduct and completely above board. But at the end of the day, you're stuck as a lawyer being tagged as Trump's lawyer, and you're stuck with the losses. And he sustained a lot of them. And Alicia, I'd remind our viewers, it is January 25th or 26th. January 31st is when we expect to get a ruling from Justice Arthur Engoron in the New York Attorney General's civil fraud case against Donald Trump, his adult sons, and others. Letitia James is seeking upwards of $370 million in disgorgement in improperly gained profits by Donald Trump and the other defendants. If Donald Trump thought he had a bad day today, he's going to have an even worse one on the 31st in the event that Justice Engoron agrees with Letitia James's damages model and says that the $370 million is the appropriate amount for him to enter against him. It's all going to start adding up. The supersedious bond, the bond that Donald Trump has to post, it has to cover the entirety of the verdict to make sure that E. Jean Carroll is protected. There's a reason why Donald Trump had to post a $5.6 million bond from the first trial that he had against E. Jean Carroll. And so it all starts adding up. And I don't care how much money Donald Trump wants to say that he has. Are his supporters going to want to continue to fund this litigation? Are his supporters going to want to continue to pay towards a legal fund to be able to support this litigation? There is a reason why he has a reputation as being one of the most litigious people in our country. And I think there ends up being a moment where people have to say, gut check wise, I'm not going to keep on funding this because it's a losing proposition. And ultimately, that's really where the legal and the political collide for Donald Trump. He doesn't want to lose. He hates losing, but he's a loser. He has lost consistently politically, and now he's losing consistently legally. And eventually, that ends up catching up to somebody like Donald Trump.
Lisa, we know that Alina Habba is currently before the microphones, I am told by our producers, complaining about the judge. No real surprise there. I mean, I feel like as though there were a lot of lessons for 1L students,
yes,
for other attorneys to watch what happened unfold in court today.
Well, I think one of the lessons, Alicia, that lawyers should learn is that trial advocacy and evidence are two of the most important classes you can take if you are an aspiring litigator. Alina Habba is an accomplished political commentator. She almost has savant-like qualities as a political communicator, not unlike former President Trump and the person who served in a similar role before her, Michael Cohen. What she is not is an experienced trial lawyer, and she repeatedly took umbrage at being shut down for doing things that simply weren't allowed by the rules of evidence. She tried to show demonstratives, which are basically big poster boards of compilations of evidence, ways of summarizing things that are already in evidence. Today in her closing argument, she tried to show one that had a number of tweets in it that hadn't been admitted into evidence yet. And she was flummoxed and angry that Judge Kaplan didn't let her show it. But what she failed to appreciate is just because the other side had agreed that there were tweets during a period of time didn't mean she was entitled to show the jury those tweets or even say how many there were. So Alina Habba's confusion about evidence has definitely been a liability for her and her client in this case. I also want to note, Alicia, you know, the bloom is off the rose, and you and I and Katie and Tim and others, we have watched this constant rotation of Trump lawyer musical chairs, and eventually he grows disillusioned with his shiniest new toy at some point. We've seen that happen with Tim Parlatore and Jim Trusty. We've seen Joe Tacopina, who tried the last of these cases, resign from the team because, as he told Rev, he had to follow his moral compass, and there was a reason that he and Donald Trump fell out. Now I wonder, Alina Habba was a core member of the defense in that New York Attorney General civil fraud trial where Katie noted we'll get an opinion. Judge Engoron has promised one by January 31st, and now she has, for the first time, lost a trial in the post-presidential era that has resulted in a verdict against Donald Trump in the excess of $80 million. Is Alina Habba done as a lawyer for Trump, even if she's not done as a mouthpiece? I don't know how much longer she's going to be trotted out in front of microphones if she keeps racking up losses like this, Alicia.